After spending some time with geometry nodes, I finally made a donut without any tutorial, so let's see how you can make it too. Let's move to the geometry nodes tab and start with our default cube. I'll select this workspace and move it to 3D viewport as well, so we can see the cube from different sides. You can also see all the commands that I use here. So let's select the cube and click on new, and this will make a new geometry node tree for us. We don't need the group input, so let's disconnect this input and move this aside. Let's start by adding a curve circle and connect it to the geometry output. You'll see that we have a circle here. Now let's add a curve to mesh node. Now we need a profile curve which can sweep around this curve to make a donut shape. So what we'll do is add a set curve radius node. Connect the original curve circle to this set curve radius node and this curve output to the input of curve in the curve to mesh node. Now in the profile curve, we'll connect the original curve. So this will give us a donut shape, but it's not very much visible right now. So let's increase or decrease this radius and increase this radius. So this controls the overall radius of the donut, and this controls the thickness of the donut or the profile of the donut. Now we have the donut shape, so let's make the icing shape. What we'll do is duplicate this shape and subtract out half of the donut from the lower side. So let's move this aside. I selected it all using the mouse and press G to move it, and similarly move the group output to the side to make some space. Let's also change the radius to 0.4 and this radius to 0.37 so that you can follow me along. Now let's add a join geometry node so we can join the multiple geometries. We'll keep it just before the group output node. Let's take the output from our curve to mesh node and pull a noodle from here and then add a separate geometry node. Then we'll take this selection and add an extrude mesh node and connect this mesh output to the join geometry node. So you'll see this gives us a beautiful pine shape, but this is not what we want for this tutorial. So it is currently extruding all the individual faces, but we want all of them as one surface. So let's turn off this individual. Now it is extruding all the donut shape at once. So we can select the offset of the extrusion from here. So let's set it to around 0.1 or 0.05, and you cannot currently see that it's extruding or not, but we need to select the top faces or the top half of the donut. So for that we'll have to give this extrude mesh a selection. So we'll add a normal node and we'll connect it to a greater than or equal node. Then we'll connect it to the selection of the separate geometry. This will give us the selection which separates the geometry. So you can see it is already affecting our donut. Select the X and Y to -1, and now if you move this slider, you will see that it's controlling the area where the icing is shown or where the extrusion is happening. So -1 in X and Y does almost what we want, and the Z controls the height or the coverage of the icing. So let's keep it around here, and this looks good. And now let's add a subdivision surface in front of the extrude mesh to smooth out this edge of the icing. Set it to level 2 so it looks better. Now we want to add some sprinkles on this icing. So we'll use the output from this node and distribute some points on it. So let's again make some space for our setup. Let's pull a noodle out from this subdivision surface and add a distribute points on faces node. Next we'll add an instance on points node, and then we'll connect this instances to the join geometry node. You'll see that nothing happens here, but we need something to distribute on this instances. So let's add a cylinder primitive, and first of all let's connect this mesh to the instances. So you'll see that currently it's too big, so we need to adjust the size of this cylinder. So let's make the vertices 8 and the radius 0.03 and the depth as 0.05. So you'll see now we have some sprinkled shapes on our icing and not on the original donut. So now we need to adjust the shape and rotation of this cylinder. So to smooth it out, let's add a subdivision surface again. So we need to elongate it on the z-axis. For that, we'll add a scale elements node. Now we need to do it on just one axis, so we'll change this uniform to single axis and change this axis from 0, 0 and 1. So that means 0 in the x and y axis and 1 on the z axis. Turn up the scale and you'll see that the extrusion starts to happen on the z axis. So let's set it to 2.3. Now we need to rotate them so they are sitting on the icing and not extruding out like this. So for that we need to control the rotation of this instanced cylinders. Let's add an align Euler to vector node. Take the normal from distribute points on faces and connect it to the vector of this align Euler to vector node. Take the rotation from this and connect it to the rotation of instance to points node. This does the work for us, and now the sprinkles are perfectly aligned to the icing as we want it. We can also play and reduce the scale of the sprinkles from here. So let's set it to somewhere around 0.6. You can also add a value node and connect it to the scale, so you can just input one value and it will change all the three values in the x, y and z node. To change the distribution or the density of the sprinkles, go to the distribute points on faces node and increase the density, and you can also check out different variations using the seed. Now our donut setup is almost complete. We just need to add a set shade smooth node at the end of this join geometry node. If you don't want to shade smooth all the components, you can also add this individually before joining to the join geometry, but since I want to smoothen all of these individual elements, so I'll add it after the join geometry node. So you'll see that these sprinkles are a lot better now. So if we turn it off, you can see the individual faces and the lines on it, and if we turn on shade smooth, you cannot see them anymore. Now the last step is to add a set material node before you join all of these geometries into the join geometry node. So let's add a set material. I'll select this one and press Shift and D and duplicate it and drop it in the other ones. Now you'll see that we can select our material from here. So we'll have to first create the materials and then select the correct material from here. So let's move to the shading tab. I'm currently in Eevee. I'll turn on ambient occlusion and bloom, and let's start with the materials. So let's do the base of the donut first. So you'll see, even if we change the color, we don't see any change in the colors here. That is because we have not actually set the materials for all of these different components. So what we can do is go into the materials tab and add all the materials first. So we have a base material, click on this plus and click on new and add an icing, and similarly click on plus and click new and add a sprinkles material. I'll change the color of the icing so we can see the effect directly, and we'll set up the sprinkles later. So let's go back to the geometry nodes, and now in the set material node, if we select this blank space and click on base and go into the material preview node, you'll see that the color is affecting here. Similarly for this one, we'll select icing and it will change, and for this one we'll select sprinkles. Now let's actually set the materials. In slot 1 for the base, we'll select a light yellowish tone and I'll just increase the roughness a little bit. For the icing, I think this dark chocolate color is fine. You can see the hex code from here, and I'll just reduce the roughness so that it's shinier. Next, let's go into the sprinkles, which is the most interesting one. For the sprinkles to have random colors, we'll use two nodes. First is object info and the second is a color ramp. Connect the random from the object info to the factor of the color ramp and connect the color to the base color. Change the type from linear to constant, and if we move the sliders, you'll see that it's affecting our sprinkles. So now we just need to add the sprinkle colors here. So I'll just move it here and click on plus multiple times to add more stops of colors, then set them manually. Now I'll change these colors to random colors. So you'll see our sprinkles have different colors now. You can control how much they are shown using these sliders, or if you change the seed from the geometry nodes, they also change. Let's reduce the roughness a little so these are shiny as well. What you can also do is add a noise texture, connect the factor to a color ramp and connect the color to base color. Pull the sliders in, increase the scale a lot and change the colors hex EFB478 and the second one to hex FFA358. And let's pull the sliders a little bit to the outside as well. Let's move them to the side and let's also pull the color noodle from here and add a bump and height node. Now connect this normal to the normal here and you'll get some bumpy texture here. We don't need it that much, so let's reduce the strength to something like 0.15 and we're all set. Now we're almost set, but let's improve some things on the donut. So let's go back to our geometry nodes tab, and if you see, these sprinkles are not really good looking. So what we can do is increase the side segments from here and you'll see the shape improves drastically to a better sprinkle shape. You can also increase the fill segments, but this will make the edges a bit more prominent, so keep it to 1 only. Now if you want the donut to have a little bit of random icing distribution, we can also do that using another separate geometry node here. So let's make some space for it. Let's duplicate the separate geometry using Shift D and add it just right next to it. Change it to face. So for this one we need to give it a random selection here. So let's add a random value node and set it to boolean and put the value to selection. So this way we'll get a random distribution of this icing, and the good thing is our distribute points on faces still works and it will only distribute the sprinkles wherever the icing is already present. So let's increase the probability so that it's not very weird looking, and there we have our donut with a good icing distribution and a distribution of sprinkles on it. You can control the icing from here, and if you want to control the coverage of icing, you can do it from here. You can make it from 0 to fully covered in icing, and if you increase the probability to 1, it will be a fully chocolate covered donut. Let's reduce it a little and increase this value also, so it's only half covered. And you can always change the size of the actual donut from here, so you can make it as big as you want and you can make it as thick as you want. And for the final render, I did not do much, but let's position the camera, change the resolution to 1080 by 1080, select our camera, click G and ZZ twice, move our mouse up and it will zoom in on the donut. So let's zoom in and let's add a plane by Shift A, mesh plane, and scale it a bit and move it a little down. Press 0 to see the camera view, and let's rotate the plane and scale it even more. Let's go into the viewport shading mode and let's add a light and move it up. Let's also go into the world setting, select the color and select an environment texture and set up an HDRI. Click on open and select any HDR that you have already. Let's select this Photoshop one, and we can always reduce the strength and it looks almost good to go. Let's switch from EV to cycles for the final render. Change our CPU to GPU if you have a supported one, and let's change the maximum samples to 128 and the max samples in viewport to 32. Let's click on render and see the result once. So this is the result with just one light and just an HDRI. If you want to improve it, you can always set up different lights, or let me know in the comments if you'd like to see my setup for the final render. If you have any queries or questions, put them down in the comments and I'll try my best to answer them. Thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.